Okay, so thank you so much for your presentations. Really happy to welcome Wanda, David, and Douglas up to the stage for a panel discussion. So it's my understanding that we have some runners with microphones going around. If you'd like to ask a question, please make sure you make yourself known to these individuals. I'm going to get us started with one quick question addressed at all of the panelists here. So Douglas, as you were talking, you were talking a lot about worldview and how this plays out in education, but also how we can take a hold of our education in a particular kind of way. And Wanda, I think you were picking up on this a little bit too in your presentation, pointing out in your own project some of the spaces that you're working in that are attuned to people and places, and you showed us some really great examples of projects that engage in community consultation, as well as some examples of projects that did not necessarily exemplify that kind of consultation. David, I really was drawn to one of the first quotes that you opened your presentation with, this idea of who is the author of the script. The link between Avatar and architecture never sounded so interesting. The work in educational settings that you've been doing after graduating, and in particular with some of your projects around this idea of what is Indigenous architecture, really have me thinking about what is the role of education in or what is the role of Indigenous perspectives in education. And so my question in sort of a roundabout way, in light of these conversations and thinking about some of the initiatives that are underway here at the U of C and certainly at other post-secondary institutions around in North America today, is how does the presence of Indigenous perspectives in educational settings impact student learning, so that both in student representation as well as in faculty representation? How does that impact the learning experience for students? And that could be Indigenous and non-Indigenous students as well.
Anybody you want to start with? Go ahead. Well, I would say for us, it starts with, for us, it's about place-based learning, I think. Part of our program is also hands-based, hands-on learning, so we do a lot of design-build work, meaning that I think some schools would see us as backwards. Some architecture schools are leaving modeling and hand drawing in the past and moving forward, and that's fine, and we do that stuff too, but we really believe in working with materials with your hands and understanding materials. So the first things that we do with our students is they chip away or they chisel away at wood. And so they have this idea that the wood speaks to them. That's their first exercise. What does that wood, it's very Louis Kahn, but what is that piece of wood specifically beside that one that looks the same, but it's a different piece of wood and it speaks to you differently? This relationship between nature and natural materials and how you learn is core. And it's about place-based, and it's because place-based learning to me is something that I'm still learning, right? That you meet elders who have really not gone very far, say geographically, and their knowledge about place and their world and their existence is so deep. So as architects, my critique of the global architect is really that we think that we can just land in a place and go for a 2-hour consultation and then fly back to our city and get on our computers, right? What I'm really learning more and more in life is it can't work like that to be meaningful to people. So, we have great examples in our program of, we've got a student named Suleiman Khan, who's clearly not Indigenous. His family comes from India. And he really, there's examples of these students that really embrace the knowledge, because really once you understand the complexity of place, then you take that with you from place to place. And you're not going to try to shallowly jump into things. So that's what it is for me.
I would say for the space that I'm in right now, I think the most important lesson that all of this brings to an education setting is really the power of listening. And I think it's something that, especially in design, I remember early in design school, we'd be so eager to start drawing. But I think it's this slow process, it's a slow architecture that we're engaged in, which has so much listening, which I think has implications beyond architecture school, beyond studies of indigeneity or Indigenous studies, to, I think, a general practice throughout the learning model of universities.
I think for me it's, again, really listening to people because I feel our job is bringing people's vision into reality. And therefore, what is the vision of the people you're serving? And I know in working with the community of Ojiboogamoo, the James Bay Cree, I mean, who is I to design a village for them when they've been there for hundreds of years, thousands of years? And I felt it was my job to see that the knowledge of their village was already inside them, and to be able to sit down with the community. And the first thing they did was build one of their structures, a chaptuan that they've been building forever. And the elders came in, and it was really a warm, comfortable place to be in. And it had amazing space and amazing feel to it itself. And have the elders tell me their vision and their dream, what they had for the future. And then, so then I took their vision and their dream, and I went back to the office, and then I interpreted their vision and dream and came back to the community and put all the drawings and everything, models out there. And I asked the people to come and tell me how I could learn and grow from their criticism. So it was a little hard on the ego to be able to have 500 people tear me to shreds. But it was the best thing that I could do, because I think you learn, when you're working with communities, sometimes, in many ways, people sometimes, they know what they don't want, but sometimes they have trouble knowing exactly what they do want because of everybody, always telling them what to do. There's always some guy from Indian Affairs telling them what to do. And as a result, it takes a while for the people to understand that they are entirely in control of their own lives, and that they have a voice, and that they have the right to speak what their needs are, and to listen to them. And the feedback, I find, is really important when people tell you what works and what doesn't work, and to come back and take all that new knowledge, which you've sparked by presenting them ideas that you gleaned from a lot of their discussions and talks, and ask them for their input and criticism. And at first they were thinking, well, you're the one that's an architect, you're the one that has the degrees. Why are you asking us? But in essence, like universities don't give out brains or degrees in common sense. And so the people have every right to tell you what they believe and think, and how it serves them and doesn't serve them. And it was just amazing once they went through, and the process was that after they went through their criticism, we wrote down absolutely everything they had to say. With all that new knowledge, we came back to the office and tore up all of our drawings and started again with new knowledge. And this time, we had a better idea. And then we came back to the community, and they were ready for us. And they again criticized it and gave us new information. And we were and I let them that we were absolutely open to modify it and change it until it suited them. And so it took 8 times coming back to the community. And if it took more, that was okay. But on the 8th time, when we presented it to them, and we asked for their criticism, there was absolute silence. And then the chief said, "Now, come on, you're to do your job. This is your community, and you've got to make sure it's going to be done right. You're going to have to live with it and maintain it and identify with it. It's your community. You have to have your input. It's valuable." And he kept pushing the people until finally there was no comments. And he said, "Well, Doug, you finally got it." And the people stood up and said, "Yeah, that's our community." And they built it and won a United Nations Award as the Village of the Future. So this is, people really know what they need, and people really, the knowledge they have is they already have. All you have to do is really listen to them. And I find that in my profession, you know, nobody asks a teacher how to design a classroom, or the kids how to design a classroom. They have to live in it. Nobody asks a doctor how to design an operating room. And that's the reason why things don't work. And if you actually ask the people that are going to use the space and use the facility and live in it and have to maintain it for the rest of their lives, they're going to tell you what works and what doesn't work. And so I think it's fundamental to be able to listen to the people and be absolutely open to be criticized, and to be able to, you have to put your ego aside and be very humble as people, including children, tell you what to do, which is in their interest. And so even in a school now, when I design a school, the first thing I do is have a session with the children, because they have to live in that school at the early part of their lives, so they got to tell you what works and doesn't work for them. And I think that is so important.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the audience? So in this panel, we were building off, I think, some of Douglas's ideas from the keynote, specifically gearing our conversations towards pathways to design. So I'm hoping that there'll be a couple of questions perhaps from students. Or anybody.
Hi, I'd like to ask about, when we look at the world today, it's a very anthropocentric worldview, so that we're very human-focused. And with what you were talking about earlier, how does the interconnectedness of all humans, or all beings, appear in architectural design? Or does it?
Well, I think that it can. I'll answer your question slightly differently, and I don't know if there's an answer to the last part in the way we think about buildings, because the framework for architecture today, just the processes of building, the construction industry, the processes of drawing, I mean, for me, one of the things that I've looked at and thought a lot about recently is just the drawing and the model. Like, Indigenous cultures didn't create miniature models of what they were going to build before they built it. They didn't sit down and etch in detail what they were going to do, because they were in tune with the environment. They knew the materials intimately. So even the process of making buildings is a slow process of detaching us from the thing that we're doing, right? So there's been lots written in architectural theory about that. So that's one side of it. But what you're hinting at, to me, is something, I'll share a little story from the studio that I just taught. And to me, it was profound, and I'll do a shortened version of it. We were sitting down, and there was a guy in Batchewana who's considered a knowledge holder, and he's not old. He's like my age, so it depends, I guess, where you are. He's not that old. But he was telling us a story about his daughter being born, and so he told a story where he was out hunting in the bush, and he was sitting up on his platform there, and he heard something in the bushes, and so he looked, and it was a hummingbird that had its wing broken, and so he took the hummingbird home, and he fixed the wing, and spent some time with this bird, and the bird flew off. And he remembered, he said, feeling quite emotionally impacted by this little hummingbird, right? He was moved when the bird flew away. He felt like there was an emotional connection there. So that was when he was younger, when he was a teenager. And he said, then when I was like in my late 20s, we had our first daughter, and there's a naming ceremony in the Ojibwe people. And so they go to an elder woman who spends some time with this baby when they're like 1 or 2 months old. And he said the elder was holding this baby, and she started to laugh hysterically. And he said, why are you laughing at my baby? And she said, well, she's got a funny character. And she said, she's got a life to her. She says she knows you from before. Her name is Hummingbird. And he said he just started bawling, right? So people could say, well, this is folklore or whatever. I don't know if I believe that, right? But when people tell you stories and you feel it, and then you think, geez, I don't know many people that are connected with the environment like that. You know, like in that way, what you're saying, those living beings. And that's something that is really hard for all of us to recover. So I've been really thinking a lot about that. Like, how do we get back to understanding that level? I mean, we talk about sustainability and ecological design, all these things. It's, yeah, right. I mean, it's LEED platinum, great, right? But is it philosophically or ontologically different? I don't know. So it's a big, there's no small answer for me.
But I guess I would just add to that. I think, you know, when you talk about grounding, you know, in this subject, and talk about grounding with our environment and with the land and with place and with the space. And I remember Mom used to always, you know, when I was out traveling on my adventures, and she would always say, you know, make sure you put your feet on the ground. You know, so I hated, to this day, I hate living above the earth. I always want to live on the earth, and it's just those basic connections. And I always, when I speak, I always have stones with me or in my pockets. When I did all my architectural exams, I had rocks in my pockets. It's that grounding that is, you know, part of our connection is just embedded in, I think, our everyday practices.
I feel that is very important, to be grounded and to have a connection with the earth and to the ancestors and to our grandfathers and grandmothers. So it was over 50 years ago, in working with the elders and fasting and following the rituals and the ceremonies, that I was asked if I would carry on the sweat lodge ceremony, which I found really grounded me and made me be more in tune with myself and more in tune with the Creator and my grandfathers and grandmothers. And so going through and with the elder and then having the gift of being able to run the lodge, I have had to, just for my own sanity in this amazing profession that sometimes drives me a little crazy, but I still love it, and I will do it until the day I died. I die because it's so exciting, and you can do so much and influence so many lives in a good way. So I do the lodge every week. I've been doing it for 50 years, every week, and that's what grounds me. That's what keeps me in tune, and that that lodge also opens up my creativity to be able to have some amazing opportunities and amazing challenges to follow through. So the foundation really that I have is through the ceremony that I do every week, and with the support of people who feel the same way I do. Because in Ottawa, damn it, you need it, you know.
So we have time for about one more question.
Thank you. I just had a question. Wanda had a very good examples of bad examples of sort of sacred elements that have been plucked and put into a different context that was completely out of context. So it'd be interesting to hear your perspective on how do you balance sort of a recognition and an honoring without crossing that line to appropriation, and where is that line, and how do you strike that in your practice when you're looking at a design and an element in that process?
So I always work with what I call knowledge brokers or boundary riders, we call them. Someone who is from that community. I will never do a project without a really close, and they don't have to be an architect, they don't have to have any training in construction, but they just have to be, to walk with me on the journey of design, because there's no way, even me being Cree, going into another community, that I can know protocol, process, structures, systems, honoring processes, meanings of worldviews, beliefs, symbols. So I always bring a knowledge broker within a project. And there should be a way to pay them, actually. I think, of all of the honorariums that we provide, I think we should be writing into our budgets as architects a line item in the schedule and in the budget for bringing our professionals from our communities in every project.
Yeah, there's a great phrase that they use at the Indigenous faculty that I've learned at Laurentian University. There's a great phrase, which is nothing about us without us, right? It means like, don't go do anything about us from your perspective. If we're not involved with it, then we're not going to really support that. And so like in the studios that I'm teaching, it's exactly that question, right? These students are being tasked with this in this really harsh, it can be a very conflicting environment. And, but what happens is if the community is involved in all of those discussions, and it was really wonderful to watch the community continually support the student work. And the students would always be respectful and say, am I using this medicine wheel in the wrong way? Just tell me now, I'll pull this out. We would have open discussions about that. And the elders were so generally accepting and really excited that they were learning about their culture through it. So I always think, because we're in academia, there's a lot more capacity to do that level of engagement in practice. It's quite hard, right? To find the time to spend. I mean, the studio students, we feast multiple times with the community. We sweated with the community members, so you have to be invited into these ceremony, but that really can show respect to that community and in terms of your design process, and you listen, as Douglas said, the key is just to keep listening. And there are good examples out there. I think if you talk to communities, some people are very happy with the work that the architects have done with them. So, I mean, I know I worked with Graham Edmonds here, Graham Edmonds Cartier. They do work with the Siksika, and I worked a little bit on the Powwow Arbor here as an intern. And they have a good relationship with David Edmonds, as far as I know. So there's lots of good examples out there to do it.
I think that exactly that you have to, in a sense, realize that you're working and bringing their visions into reality. So therefore, in many ways, you're learning a great deal every time you come to a community. I always feel like in a true creative process, creativity, by its definition, is creating something from nothing. Like, it's powerful to have a blank sheet of paper where there's nothing on it and you have to create something. So with that, I feel you should come to the community not knowing, like having a clear head and not knowing, have no preconceived ideas at all what you're going to do, no agendas. Come there humbly, not knowing anything, and allow yourself to be educated by the community, and particularly by the elders, and especially the women in the community, of what is needed for the community. And like the elders teach you in ceremonies, be as humble as a blade of grass. And in that way, you're open for learning. But if you come there with any degree of, oh, I'm the professional, I know what I'm doing, then you're in serious trouble. Because then you're just creating another colonial act perpetrated on the people by an outsider. And if anything, if you operate in a good way with the people and have them be the one that guide you from the very beginning you walk into the community until you leave, then you're decolonizing the people instead of colonizing the people. So I feel it's so important to give the community that respect and have the understanding that all of the knowledge that they need to have to build their community or their buildings and everything is already in the people, in the community, and that you really bring nothing from the outside except the opportunity of assisting them and helping them bring these dreams into reality. You have that knowledge, you have the knowledge of technology or whatever it takes, or even dealing with government negotiations or whatever it takes to be able to help them bring their vision into reality. But it's got to be their vision all the way, and a reflection of their knowledge and their wisdom, a reflection of themselves, not a reflection of yourself. You have to be, like the elders say, when you come to the lodge, be at par with a blade of grass in all humility.
I think that's a really wonderful place to end. Thank you to our panelists for the great conversations and for your presentations. Thank you so much.